Ethan Miller had been dreaming about this vacation for years. Between his long hours as a project manager and his wife Laura's nursing shifts, life had become a blur of deadlines and exhaustion. When they finally booked 2 weeks in Colorado to visit Laura's sister, it felt like a long-awaited breath of freedom. Their home in Maple Grove Estates was their pride and joy, a modest 2-story house with a clean lawn, fresh paint, and a cozy backyard garden that Ethan tended every weekend. Everything about it reflected the couple's dedication to keeping their space beautiful and peaceful. Before leaving, Ethan made sure every detail was in order. He trimmed the hedges, set the sprinklers on an automatic timer, and asked his neighbor, Tom, to keep an eye on things. The mail was on hold, the motion sensors were tested, and his security cameras were synced to his phone. He double-checked the locks twice before setting the alarm system. "We're finally going to relax," Laura said, smiling as they loaded their bags into the car. Ethan laughed and replied, "Nothing can go wrong for 2 weeks, right?" But Maple Grove Estates wasn't just any suburban neighborhood. It was under the rule of one of the most controlling homeowners associations in the state. The HOA, led by Marjorie Clark, a retired attorney with too much free time and an inflated sense of authority, enforced every rule with an iron fist. She was known for measuring grass height with a ruler and sending warning letters if a trash can was left out for too long. Ethan had managed to stay out of her way by always following the rules, or so he thought. On the morning they left, Marjorie happened to see them drive off. From her front porch, she made a note in her little clipboard labeled Community Standards. She didn't like that Ethan's fence leaned slightly or that his shed door had faded paint. "Standards must be maintained," she muttered, already plotting her next inspection. As Ethan and Laura drove off into the sunrise, laughing and singing along to the radio, he felt a deep sense of peace. The house stood silent behind them, cameras blinking gently in standby mode, the yard perfect in every way. He had no idea that while he was gone, those same cameras would capture something far more unsettling than a quiet neighborhood evening. 3 days after Ethan and Laura left for their vacation, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. Marjorie Clark, armed with her clipboard and camera phone, made her daily rounds through Maple Grove Estates. She prided herself on being the eyes of the community. When she reached Ethan's house, her sharp eyes immediately caught what she considered a violation. The left side of his wooden fence leaned slightly inward, and a potted plant sat near the gate, something she had previously advised homeowners not to do. She frowned, muttering, that could be a safety hazard. It didn't matter that Ethan was on vacation. In her mind, HOA rules didn't rest just because someone left town. She called 2 other board members, Dennis and Carol, insisting that a routine HOA safety inspection was required. Within an hour, the 3 arrived at Ethan's property, clipboards in hand and self-importance radiating off them. Despite the sign clearly stating private property, no trespassing, Marjorie unlatched the side gate and stepped into the backyard. "We're authorized to do this," she said firmly, as Dennis hesitated. The motion-activated camera on the back porch blinked red, but Marjorie dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "Probably fake," she scoffed. They walked through the yard, taking photos of every minor imperfection, a few leaves in the gutter, a garden hose left coiled near the patio, a tiny patch of grass turning yellow. "Unacceptable for Maple Grove standards," she declared. Then her attention turned to Ethan's shed. "We need to make sure there's nothing hazardous stored inside," she announced, reaching for the latch. Carol looked uneasy. "Marjorie, this feels like trespassing." Marjorie rolled her eyes. "Nonsense. It's our duty to protect the neighborhood." She pulled the door open and peeked inside. Rows of neatly arranged tools, an old generator, and a few cans of paint lined the shelves. She began taking photos, claiming it could be a potential violation for unapproved equipment storage. What she didn't know was that Ethan's high-resolution security camera was recording everything, every word, every photo, every moment she stepped over the line. The footage would later become the center of a storm that Maple Grove Estates would never forget. But at that moment, Marjorie felt untouchable, convinced she was simply enforcing the rules. She smiled proudly and said, "Routine inspection complete." Ethan and Laura were sitting on a sunlit patio in Colorado, sipping coffee and enjoying the mountain air, when Ethan's phone buzzed with a security alert. He glanced at it casually, expecting maybe a stray cat or mail delivery, but his expression changed the moment he saw the live feed. On his screen, 3 figures stood in his backyard, one of them unmistakably Marjorie Clark, clipboard in hand, opening his shed door like she owned the place. For a second, he couldn't believe it. Then his jaw tightened. "Laura, they're on our property," he said, his voice rising. "The HOA. They broke into the yard." She leaned over his shoulder, eyes widening as the camera captured Marjorie snapping photos and pointing at their belongings. "Is she serious?" "She's inside the shed." Ethan quickly opened his security app and began recording the footage remotely, saving every clip. His hands shook as he called the local police department. "I need to report trespassing," he said, explaining the situation. The officer on the other end listened carefully, confirming that police could be dispatched immediately since there was active video evidence. Within 20 minutes, a patrol car arrived at Ethan's home back in Maple Grove. The officer found Marjorie and the 2 board members still in the backyard, arguing about inspection notes. The officer asked them to step out of the property line. Marjorie crossed her arms defiantly. "Officer, we're members of the HOA board. We have a right to inspect when community standards are in question." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, HOA authority doesn't grant you access to private property without the homeowner's consent. You're trespassing." Her face flushed red. "That's absurd." "We're protecting the neighborhood," she insisted, but her voice trembled slightly now. Dennis and Carol exchanged worried glances, realizing how bad this looked. Meanwhile, Ethan stayed on the call, watching the live feed. He heard the officer telling Marjorie to leave immediately. Instead, she argued again, refusing to step out until proper documentation was completed. That was the final straw. The officer called for backup, and when they arrived, Marjorie's protests turned to disbelief as she was placed in handcuffs. Back in Colorado, Ethan exhaled in disbelief, half angry, half relieved. "She actually got herself arrested," Laura said softly. Ethan stared at the frozen image of the police car on his phone screen and muttered, "All that for a fence post." The news spread through Maple Grove estates faster than anyone could have imagined. By the next morning, every neighbor knew that the HOA president, Marjorie Clark, had been arrested for trespassing on Ethan Miller's property. Some residents couldn't help but laugh quietly, while others shook their heads in disbelief. For years, Marjorie had been the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, sending out violation notices for everything from mailbox paint to lawn ornaments. Now she was the one making headlines, and not in the way she ever wanted. Ethan and Laura returned home 2 days later. As they pulled into their driveway, the sight of flashing red and blue reflections still faintly visible in the pavement felt surreal. Their neighbor, Tom, walked over with a grin. "You missed quite a show," he said. "Half the neighborhood was out here watching the police cart her off." She kept shouting about community rights. Ethan chuckled dryly. "Guess she found out what real laws look like." Inside, everything was just as they had left it except for the small sticker on their shed door, left by the police as part of the evidence collection. Ethan replayed the camera footage again that evening, shaking his head as he watched Marjorie stomp through his garden like she owned it. The video had already been shared with the HOA's legal department and local media. A small community news outlet even ran the headline, "HOA President Arrested After Routine Inspection Gone Wrong." Within a week, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Marjorie, still facing misdemeanor trespassing charges, was officially removed from her position. Dennis and Carol quietly resigned, unable to face the backlash. The board issued a public apology to Ethan and promised to review all policies related to property inspections. Ethan's attorney filed a civil suit for damages and privacy invasion and won a settlement.